In the complex tapestry of global politics, few threads are as tangled as the support of the US to Israel, a relationship that has spanned 75 years and continues to provoke debate. Many followers of American policy grapple with the reasons behind this unwavering backing. Is it a strategic maneuver to safeguard US interests or means to empower Israel's politics in the volatile Middle East? This approach encompasses vast military and economic aid, raising questions about its impact on both American interests and regional dynamics. As conflicts rage and tensions rise, notably with recent escalations involving Gaza, Lebanon, and Iran, the consequences of these alliances became even more pronounced. With each new development, the narrative grows richer, posing challenges not only to the stability of the region, but also to America's standing among Arab nations and beyond. Welcome to In Depth. For more analysis, we're joined from the occupied Jerusalem by Dmitry Delyani, an expert in Israeli affairs. Good evening to you, Mr. Delyani.
Good evening, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. And Mr. Delyani, how would you characterize the historical relationship between the US and Israel, especially in terms of its impact on the Palestinian lives?
The relationship between the State of Israel and the U.S. government with its different branches, the executive and the legislative specifically, has been developing and becoming closer and closer to the point that the roles have been switched. If we look at how the relationship was at the establishment of the State of Israel, where the American president rejected the whole idea of a Jewish state, to the point that today there's a clear conflicting of interest, to the point that Israeli interest win over American interest by the votes of U.S. Congress people and the White House. In other words, when the State of Israel was established, it was a case of the dog wagging its tail. Meaning the dog being the United States of America and the tail being Israel. Now it's the other way around, where the tail is wagging the dog. The tail, again, being Israel and the dog being the United States of America. And the corruption, the financial, political corruption of the U.S. governing system, especially the election systems and the contribution systems and the corporate control over politics, have opened a lot of opportunity for the State of Israel to kind of exploit many social and political weaknesses and soft spots in the United States of America, beginning from investing in the memory of the Holocaust to creation of concepts like the Judeo-Christian culture, which something that is totally fabricated and made up post World War II, to the point that people like Miriam Adelson, an Israeli woman, a widower of an Jewish American billionaire, basically is paying off close to $100 million to Donald Trump, for example, to apply some of her beliefs on occupied land in this part of the world. So it's becoming more of control through money and through the scaring people of something called anti-Semitism, and conflating that with to the Zionist supremacist genocidal policies of the state of Israel.
Well, actually, you spoke about what is going on in the meanwhile, but let me here ask you, in which ways do you think the American commitment to Israel or the influence of the US over Israel has prolonged or intensified the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank?
Well, for the state of Israel to be in such a position of control, influence over the only or the major world power, for sure gives it more power to further oppress our people and commit genocide and continue to be committing genocide and ethnic cleansing, whether it was in Gaza or the West Bank, including occupied East Jerusalem. Having a blind support from the United States White House or the Congress, both chambers, has simply given the state of Israel a green light to do whatever it wants. And I truly believe that if the United States would stop its political, military, financial support to the state of Israel, our problems in the Middle East in general, and specifically as Palestine, would probably cease to exist.
Now, how would you evaluate the influence of the pro-Israel lobbies in shaping US policies that seem to disregard the Palestinian rights?
It's a simple game of personal political interests of the decision makers, whether they were in Congress, Senate, or in the White House. It's very simple that the state of Israel basically has found a way through a lobby that is not the Jewish lobby. The Zionist lobby is much larger than the Zionist than Jewish groups. It's for the evangelical churches, not all of them, but the most prominent ones. On top of that, you have to add that other lobbies have an interest, vested interest, in Israel's behavior and crimes. And the most important of them and most powerful, even more than the Zionist lobby, which is the industrial complex, they have had joined forces to support the genocidal state of Israel because, for many reasons. For the Zionist lobby, it's ideology, and for the military industrial complex, it's business. So we have ideology and business coming together to support the state of Israel in whatever is right direction chooses, because the Israeli rights interest in keep on the war and the tension in the region because it brings them more votes and keeps them in power. That's their policy. It kind of met the interest of those two groups, very powerful lobbies that shape pretty much the U.S. policy, especially in the Middle East. And we know that, of course, there are other lobbies, the oil lobby and other lobbies, but these lobbies, their fight is not focused on Palestine or the Israeli military occupation. So the role this means, what can these lobbies take American politics to the point that it kind of contradicts the U.S. interests in this area? And the answer to that question lies in how much we, as Arabs and Palestinians especially, react to that fact and how we counter these efforts. That's one. Two, and how much awareness does the American people have through social media and other venues to show that these lobbies have to be limited in their power and influence over U.S. policy. So it's a partnership between the American people and the Arab people to put a stop to these lobbies that work against our interests as people, whether here or in the United States of America.
Brings me to ask you, What are the main misconceptions in the US about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that perpetuate support for Israel?
Well, the most important thing that Israel has been pushing for decades, that this is a religious war. And this is something that we haven't succeeded yet to counter, that this is a national cause, not a religious war. Unfortunately, there were voices from the Middle East with a religious agenda of giving any conflict, even internal conflicts in their own countries, even economic issues, to give it a religious address. And unfortunately, these voices have been heard, coupled with the Israeli Zionist voices in the United States, to give this cause, the Palestinian cause, a religious identity, which is not at all, and which is to our disadvantage. And you may want to ask why. The reason for that is, if this is a national cause, the state of Israel has no excuse, has even no talking points. What would make people from all over the world, especially Eastern Europe, to come to a separate part of the world and occupy it, abuse its people? But if you give that a religious title, that God gave them that this land, they have a story to tell. And unfortunately, instead of all of us standing together as Arabs, as Palestinians, as peace-loving people, stand together to counter that rhetoric that this is purely national cause, this is a human rights cause, this is a humanitarian crisis, this is international law based conflict. We unfortunately have people among us that join, willingly or unwillingly, deliberately or not, given this conflict and a religious identity. And this is one of the major problems, probably the major problem. Two, another problem that we face is that Israel was able to speak the language of Americans and the West in general, for simple reason that they are Westerners, they are Europeans, they are Americans, all strangers to this part of the world. So they know how to speak the rhetoric better than we do. Their social values are very similar than it is of ours, which is only natural because we are in a total separate part of the world. But they have used that to the ability of Israelis to kind of melt socially in the United States and have people being pushed and cooperating together to employ people in specific sensitive positions. If you at the State Department for past couple of decades, you would see the people who are handling Middle East issues, for the larger part, have what they call family ties or ideological ties to the State of Israel. In other words, they are of Zionist Jewish faith. And I do separate between Jewish and Zionists, and we have no issues with Jews or Jews. You would find that the vast majority of them are of some ties with the State of Israel, to the point that the President of the United States proudly admits that he is a Zionist. For me, that's admitting being racist, supremacist, genocidal, all at the same time. So these three issues or three problems have caused the control, or have caused Israel to win over the policies that pertain to the Middle East. And if you notice, if there's any political maneuver or a law or anything that has to do anything outside the Middle East or Palestine and Israel, probably these lobbies do not have as much influence as they do here.
From this perspective and on the international arena, what's your take on the US protection of Israel in the international forum and forums like the UN Security Council? And how do you view the credibility it is to the US as a peace mediator?
The United States of America has no credibility whatsoever when it comes to issues pertaining to Middle East politics, especially the Palestinian cause. They are one-sided, pushing. They are more, and many times they are more Israelis than the Israelis themselves. As it says, more Catholic than the Pope. This is a classic case of U.S. Policy. No matter who occupies the White House, no matter who has the majority in the House or Senate, the United States has exhibited blind support that it counter its own interest in the Middle East, and one of the byproducts of such a relationship is for the United States of America to defend the state of Israel at any cost that you could imagine. Of course, this relationship is not logical and will not be ever logical. But if you go back to what I said about the corrupt political system in the United States, it would be much clearer to see how this illogical relationship was built and how is it sustained. And for those that say that this would make the United States of America lose its status around the world, I totally disagree. The United States, with its economy, its military, its extremely strong ties to major countries around the world, especially in Western Europe and Asia, has guaranteed to be on top of the world for many years to come, whether we like that fact or not. But this is it. Even when we talk about its relationship with China, it's a codependency. Nobody wins when another one loses, so that's even preserved. So what we have to do, it's either get into the game, play internal American politics, see where the levels we can go through, or we can always stay suffering the consequences of the Israeli-American relationship.
Now, how, from your point of view, does the US military aid to Israel shift the balance of power in the region, particularly with regard to Palestinian defense and resistance in particular?
There is no country in the Middle East, including actually the state of Israel, is a match or even close to a match to the United States military. Not even Russia, not even a collection of the 10 countries
of course, this is from your point of view, and this is your opinion, because this is
No,
not...
that's numbers.
Yes.
Not numbers. This is, if you look at any analytical study about military power, you would find that the United States is actually much more powerful than the 10 countries that come after it combined. And with all due respect to all militaries in the region,
definitely the US is one of the most powerful and big countries in the whole world. But we're speaking here about its support to Israel militarily and how it could shift the whole situation and the balance of power in the region.
Well, I was going to that point until
please do.
You commented. What I meant to say is, at the end of the day, we, as Palestinians that have not realized our state yet, we are no match to the United States of America. And you have to understand, especially with the Egyptian experience, that every time that you fight the state of Israel, you are actually fighting the United States of America. And in wars that it has won, like the United States, which we are all proud of. But at the end of the day, the United States, at one point, Egypt realized that it's not fighting Israel, it's fighting the United States of America. So because of the illogical, corrupt relationship between Israel and the United States, it is clear for everyone in the region, if you fight Israel, you are fighting the United States of America. And the only way out of this is to get a lobby that is, whether you want to call it an Arab lobby, whatever lobby, that would employ resources that our countries in the Middle East have to counter the Zionist lobby. And it's going to be an uphill battle because the Zionist lobby is well rooted lobby in not only Washington, D.C., American culture, educational system, in every walk of life. They are there. They've been there because they are not based on uh, 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 um, Jewish voters. And by the way, the vast majority of Jewish voters in the United States that I have dealt with were anti-Zionist. Actually, the most anti-Zionist people I met in the United States were Jews, progressive Jews who are against the idea of colonial enterprise that Israel represents. But anyway, at any rate, the situation will remain at the status quo until we do something to counter and to disrupt that relationship between the United States and the state of Israel. And so far, I cannot see any hope for any materialization of such an idea in any time soon.
Right, thank you so much. That was Mr. Dimitri Delyani, a member of the Fatah Party's Revolutionary Council. Thank you so much for being with us and for your insights. And before we continue our discussion, let's have a very quick break and we'll come back. Well, welcome back. And the results of the upcoming US elections, whether they lead to Kamala Harris becoming the first female president or Donald Trump being elected, will not change the enduring Israel-US relationship. According to the Jerusalem Post, historical precedent shows that despite varying presidential attitudes since Israel's founding in 1948, the bond has consistently thrived, supported by the robust defense, intelligence, business ties, and congressional connections. Disagreements such as those during the Netanyahu-Obama years highlight the complexities of the relationship but do not signify any irreparable split. Elections may shed or rather shift dynamics, but they don't fundamentally fracture the relationship. As the elections approach, their implications for the US, Israel, and the global politics remain significant, emphasizing the resilience and depth of this alliance. And for more analysis, we are joined from Ramallah by Dr. Raed Al-Dubai, head of the Department of Political Science of Al-Najah National University. Good evening to you, Dr. Raed.
Good evening, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. And Dr. Raed, from your perspective, how has the unwavering US support for Israel impacted the Palestinian cause over the years?
Well, from the beginning, let me start from what did you say about the complicity between Netanyahu and Obama. There is a fact that the biggest support for Israel has been initiated by America during Obama's time. And this continuing relation, which not start, by the way, on 1948, because Israel and America sharing the same roots, which is meaning both have been founded by killing and by genocidal policies against the landowners. And this religious background came from the very first step of the new settlers whom invaded the landowners and the Americans when they committed genocide. Used literally the Old Testament during that time. They called themselves the chosen people of God, and they called those who called them Red Indians, the New Canaan, even they called Washington during this time the New Jerusalem of God. So this ideological background and this ideological relation between America and Israel, back to decades and back to centuries, not to 1948. And we all know that by de facto, America was the very first country to recognize Israel as a state. So this ideological, economic, which has been strengthened because of the Zionist groups and lobbies inside America, never stopped. And it seems that unlikely this one-sided policies and this biased policies by Republicans and Democratic administration will continue in the history today and in the future.
Right. Mr. Rod, can you elaborate on the specific ways that U.S. financial and military aid has bolstered Israel's control over Palestinian territories?
Not just Palestinian territories, but even now there is a very common policy by all the American administrations since 1948 to keep the sovereignty of Israel on the whole region and Middle East. What we've seen from 1940, the unlimited American support to Israel during their aggression against Egypt in 1956, in 1967, and we've seen it super clearly during the war of 1973. We've seen it during the aggression against Lebanon in 1982, and this unlimited support, political, economic, military support to Israel against the Palestinian people and against the American project. But because it's super important to mention that the recognition of 242 and the 338 UN Security Council resolution were never been a Palestinian or Arab demand. It was all the time an American demand from PLO to be accepted as a legitimate player in the peace process. When Palestinians accepted the two-state solution and the international legitimacy, and when they were even unrealistically realistic, the American administration decided to take the side of the right-wing governments in Israel, not just Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu, but even the during Sharon and during Menachem Begin, and from the beginning of this conflict, America always takes political, economic, and many other internal reasons inside America. Unfortunately, as the different American presidents said, there is a Israeli lobby inside US, but they never seen an Arab or Palestinian lobby who could effect or make a difference inside the American community.
In your opinion, what motives the US has to continue offering such strong political backing to Israel despite the international criticism?
And it's very clear that what we have seen during the genocidal policies of the current right-wing religious government in Israel shows very clearly that Netanyahu and Biden crossed in many policies. It was very clear the disagreement between the two sides. But unfortunately, in spite all of this crossing during the previous 2 years, Biden never been able to take one position. What we've seen is just rhetoric, words, slogans, but zero actions. And I do believe that this government and these policies will continue, especially if Trump's come to the power in the next week. Trump was very clear. He annexed East Jerusalem. He moved the American embassy is Jerusalem, and it is very clear because of many reasons, ideological and economic reasons, that he would be ready to annex the settlements to Israel. So that Paris not doesn't have different choices. By the way, as a Palestinians, we never been able to have the luxury to compare between good and bad. Unfortunately, we have to compare between bad and worst. And in our eyes, Trump is the worst of the worst because the 4 years we had with him were the most difficult and critical 4 years for the Palestinian. Strategically, he touched the issue of the UNRWA, the right of return for Palestinian people, the free normalization between the Arab regimes and Israel. But Kamala Harris as well doesn't have a policy based on international law and UN resolutions. But we always, as a Palestinians, in a corner that we have to choose between the bad and the worst. And for us, Kamala Harris is the bad and Trump is the worst, but it is very clear that one of the main and the constant policies for all the American administration is the sovereignty of the state of Israel on the region and protecting the Israeli genocidal policies and apartheid policies against Palestinian people.
Right, that was Dr. Raed Al-Dabai, head of the Department of Political Science at Al Najah National University. We thank you so much for being with us and for your insights. And before we continue our discussion, let's take a look at this report titled U.S. Presidential Support by Israel. Stay tuned. Well, for more analysis, we're joined by Dr. Doug Davis, Professor of International Relations. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you so much for being with us. And Dr. Davis, let me ask you here, could you your perspective on the historical basis for the United States' strong support for Israel and how it aligns with the American foreign policy objectives?
Thank you very much. And the relationship between the U.S. and Israel has gone through multiple phases, but the way that we see it now and the way that we understand it back to the Johnson administration. We have to remember in the early days, after the Cold War ended, the United States and the Soviet Union were the first states to jointly recognize Israel. But we didn't have close relations because during the Cold War, the United States was fighting the anti-communist coalition. And so we really didn't know what to do with Israel. We had a more of a standoffish relationship. And if you look at 1956, the Suez Crisis, for example, the U.S. opposed Israel. And the United States we forced the UK to pull out under Anthony Eden. And then we also kind of cornered the French. So the French backed off. And so but the relationship fundamentally changes following the 1967 war, and we see this during the Johnson administration, and that's when the United States really took a clear position to favor Israel. The reason it did that was during the Cold War, and remember the parties that were opposing Israel were joined to the communists. they were being armed by Russia. And so to balance this, of course, the United States needed to defend the democratic states within the region, and Israel was always going to be a state that met that criteria. And also, if we look at it was a perfect relationship in a way, because Israel has always depended on great powers for support, and the United States was a great power that could, in fact, provide support. So Israel was searching for someone that could protect it, and the United States was looking for another partner in the region that could coincide with this agenda. And you have to remember that at this time, there was a very close affinity between the Israelis and the United States. And the Americans, there was no comparison. If we look at the internal dynamics and we look at the education, for example, if you go back and look at the university system, there wasn't a degree in American studies offered any until recently. But within the
But
Israeli
Mr. Davis,
yes.
Mr. Davis, let me hear. I'm just quoting some of the different presidents' speeches, which were all, these words were reiterated in all their speeches: the unequivocal support to Israel, the solid and unbreakable relations with Israel. So it was reiterated in all the speeches by all the presidents that we've seen in the United States. That theme has never changed. So it's not according to administrations or different administrations, as you say, respectively here.
Okay. No, respectively, I think you're wrong. If you look at Eisenhower, for example, that quote would not have been said during his administration. It's a much more recent phenomenon, and it does go back from 1960s to the present. So basically, everyone who's now in the region would be a part of the second phase and the third phase. But you're right, if we look at contemporary, correct. There is an unbreakable bond between the United States and Israel that is very clearly felt, and it's very profound in both parties. That said, we are interested in a new phase because if we look at the Democratic Party, it's divided. There is a large part of the Democrats that in fact favor the Palestinians. And so this creates a very difficult dynamic for Democratic politicians to navigate because they can't alienate either their Jewish supporters nor their Arab supporters. And so it makes it very difficult for them to have any kind of policy that would be decisive in the region. And if you look at, for example, Biden's policy and his ineffectiveness, which really, unfortunately, he has been pretty ineffective when it comes to ending conflict within the Middle East and broadly within the world. Part of that is because he is curtailed by these two different positions in his own party that he cannot alienate. So I think in your objection, it's noted, but I think it's historically not true. Because, the early presidents were more ambiguous. Now, Truman was for Israel. Eisenhower was not. Kennedy was mixed. And there is a fundamental change going from Johnson to the present. So if you talk about Lyndon Johnson all the way to contemporary to today, you're right. But that said, the United States is in a very difficult moment with the voters on the left because the Democratic Party now is different than it was in the past 30 years.
If I'm not right, then what we've seen so far, it's not about me, right or wrong, but these were quotes. I'm quoting just presidents. I'm just reporting the incidents. Sure. And if there were differences in any of the administrations, Eisenhower or Mr. Johnson or whatsoever, then from your point of view, how do you evaluate the U.S. financial and military aid to Israel all the time on the broader Middle East, particularly with regard to the stability of the whole region?
Well, that is a great question, and I think that the United States does have a long-term relationship with Israel, and because part of it is the of October 7th, if we look at the Israeli populations, the families that were celebrating the music festival, the people that were at home that were systematically eliminated. It was planned and carried out by the Palestinians in Gaza. That's something that resonates with all Americans. All Americans want. There is a vulnerability of Israel. Israel does in fact need the assistance of other powers to defend it because of it's obviously in a very difficult region. And that said, there is animosity people in the regions and the states that surround it, in particular with terrorists and other groups that have set forward and wish to target and eliminate Israel. So it's a tough position, but whenever we see a state like that, that's a democracy, and they cry for help with other democracies, they're going to be defended. And the fact that Israel has this great relationship does in fact resonate with the greater United States approach to defending democracies, as well as the specific vulnerabilities.
And what kind of democracy are we seeing here in the Palestinian occupied territories, or in Lebanon, or in any of the countries that are being struck by Israel? And what kind of democracy are we speaking about when we have no objection at all from the congressional members, or from any of the members in the administration, or any opponents to any of the reactions towards those decisions?
Well, that's a great question. What kind of democracy is present? And if we look at under the Palestinian Authority, there were a lot of problems and issues with democracy. And looking at the Lebanese state, the confessional democracy, the most important difficulty is that systems of government were not able to gain adequate, they weren't able to convince other democracies that they were in fact modern, to actually represent and act for the interests of the populations at large. And there's competitive, free and fair elections. So just because you have elections and you have the appearance of democracy doesn't mean you have democracy. And there is a certain criteria within democratic states that need to be met before states can in fact be part of that system. And if you want to think about this, there is a very simple illustration. Look at the structures that states have to go through before they join NATO. For example, if we look at all of the institutional changes that need to take place within Eastern Europe, which took a long time for those states to be able to make and institute those changes so that they could in fact gain membership within NATO. But that's all part of the Partnership for Peace program. There is no similar thing within the governments in the Arab world.
I think this is from your own perspective, right? This is from your or the criteria put by your side, right? Now, let me here take it from our side, and given the consistent U.S. support for Israel, what do you think are the barriers to an unbiased American role in the peace negotiations?
Well, honestly, I think the biggest difficulty is our right now we're in a presidential election, and the fact that Biden is that he will be leaving office shortly. Had he stayed in office and had he won for re-election, he would have a lot more authority and a lot more agency within the region at large. And the really unfortunate thing for me is that the United States has been much less of a protagonist, that we have not been able to effectively work to end the conflict in either region or bring about a situation that would stabilize it. And so part of that is because of the division, in particular within the Democratic Party of the United States, that really binds the United States. So we can't come out too much in favor of Israel or too much in favor of the Palestinians or the Lebanese, because that would alienate the other side of the party and would have huge effects on the candidacy of Harris going forward in the presidential election. So I think that is a tremendous barrier and a difficulty that the United States faces. Whenever we go to change an administration and the president is a lame duck, we almost have to wait till the next president comes to office to actually deal with this, which means that until January 20th, the United States will in fact have less to mitigate and stand in and settle this disputes. So that's a part of the structure of our system.
Right. So until January 20th, with the new administration, how does the American towards the U.S. in the Middle East, especially among populations sympathetic to the Palestinians and the Lebanese rights?
Well, that's a great question. And I really think it depends on who wins the election in November. So who wins next Tuesday's presidential election? Because that will, I think that the candidate that wins will have to have a policy. So I'm sure both candidates are in fact putting forth a policy towards the Middle East. And one thing you notice that Harris has not put forward a Middle Eastern plan yet because it's something that is very difficult and contentious and can, as I said, cause divisions. But that is something that the candidates will in fact have to do once they're elected, because right now they're trying to gain a coalition. But after they're elected, they have to create legitimacy for themselves as leaders and for the United States. So they will have to address this. And the one thing that the United States will have going forward is a very clear idea of who that leader will be in January. And so if it's Trump or if it's Harris, either candidate will in fact spend a substantial amount of the time after they win the election to create a policy that they believe in, that will bring about stability and peace within the region. And you have to understand that is the American goal. I mean, the war benefits no one. Right now, the division, I believe, hurts, and particularly the establishment. We're in office now. Electorally, they're I think very much hurt. So we will see that when the election is done, the candidate that wins will in fact have to make and appeal to everyone in the Middle East.
Now,
a legitimate plan.
Yes, but when the new administration is in office, or any new administration, do you think they will stop using the veto power? And how do you view the implication of the U.S. veto power in the UN Security Council would help in shielding Israel from, would help in to shield Israel rather from the.
I think the U.S. will continue to use its veto power, and what that really does is it means that that when there's a position that comes up that involves Israel, if Israel is not involved in looking at it to make sure that it meets its security interests, that and I imagine that the administration would throw that out, but. We have to understand that we are at a generational point in the United States, and we see a lot of the young voters and the supporters of the Democratic Party who are now moving away from Israel, and that will have long-term consequences within the region. I don't know what they are. Nobody knows that, but the United States is at a generational change, and so it's something that has to be watched very closely. But we're at a very interesting moment in American history. And, if the Democratic Party now is so divided in its approach to the Arab and Israeli issue, the United States and make it a little bit more difficult for us to have policies that will withstand a change in partisan administration. So when we switch from Democrats to Republicans or Republicans to Democrats, we may see major changes in our foreign policy. And if that's the case, that's not healthy for our country, and I think it's not healthy for the world. And so the weakness is that the United States needs a clear, coherent policy position that will endure both political parties, that will in fact work to bring stability to the region. And that's something that requires a lot of work on our part.
Well, all hopeful, Mr. Davis, and that was Dr. J. Doc Davis, a professor of international relations. We thank you so much for your insights here. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of In Depth. Don't forget to follow Qnews on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Qnews EGY to stay informed, and for real-time updates, connect with us on the UMS digital platform. Watch it. Many thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more updates on Qnews.